my teaching learning sessions of BPC Foundations of Psychology. My name is Sonal Singh Pawar and I'm academic counselor for BA courses for psychology. Let's continue with our course of personality and intelligence, one of the final and the most interesting block that we are going to start with. Starting with personality, as we continue from our last session, personality is an enduring characteristic that may change and respond to different situations, which is very true. As we understand and feel, will personality ever change? No, our personality does not change. Personality has enduring, relatively stable characteristics that will stay with you over a long period of time. And it doesn't change until there is any traumatic condition, a life event that make changes around you. So personality remains the same until we have life changes, like at an age duration of 50s, 40s, from a time of 20 to 40s, we might change at a pedestal of moving to another set of age stream. But until then, personality is relatively stable. Also, according to American Psychological Association, they refer personality as individual differences, which is very true. The reason that we test personality, the reason that we want to know about our personality and do assessment is also individual differences that will help us characterize our characteristic thinking, behavior patterns, how we feel differently from other people in the same context, also in the ways we patternize our thinking in the same situation where there might be another five of us thinking in a different manner. So that's how American Psychological Association stated that personality is individual differences amongst people. Now, coming back to the theories of personality, there are three major approaches under which the theories have been clustered. The first three approaches that will be studied over the two sessions is, first is the type, trait, and interactionism. So when we talk about the trait approach is something that came as one of the most stable approaches of personality. What did they say about personality? And it's an umbrella term. We will find a lot of theories under trait approach. So there will be multiple theories under this approach. So trait stated that it is a class of individual that is said to share a common collection of characteristics but differing from one another. So when we talk about a trait is relatively stable, but it's going to make you differentiate from the other people. That's why it's broad disposition. So these are, let's take an example. Trait is an adjective which will differentiate you from the others. On top of the type is a common collection of common features. Like, let's take an example of the fact that we all are studying psychology and you have a course which is BAG, which is helping you associate to psychology, is a type. Now, what is going to be your trait? Trait is an adjective. It is a broad disposition. Disposition is a personality factor, which is something that characterizes you, making you different from the other people. So the way that you study psychology, the way that you listen and understand the session is going to be a trait approach. So type is collection, and on the basis of similarity, we assess your personality. And trait on the other level are differences on the basis of which we assess your personality. So it's a very simple way of understanding the two major approaches. Type talks about collection of common characteristics, and trait talks about stable, relatively stable characteristic which will differentiate you from the other individuals. Commonly, these are adjectives in the beginning, the time of 1900s and 10 and 20s when it all started, they were just simple adjectives people were using. Now, coming to the third and the most, something that is very easy to understand is the interactionism. What does the word interactionism state? Is that the more we interact with the environment, the personality characteristics keeps changing, which is our personality factors are influenced by situational factors. I'll give you an example for this. So the fact that you behave very differently with your friends, you come back home and you're such a different person, you speak to your partners, you're so different at that point of time. So your features changing according to situational factors is something which is interactionism. Like, an individual who's very aggressive, but in front of their bosses and, elders, the individual is very obedient. So that's situationism, which is also stated as interactionism, which is the fact that you interact with different situations, your personality is going to give you a different kind. Now, little difference between the trait and type that you will see in the picture. Personality refers to psychological classification of type, whereas personality trait refers to the difference, the level of degrees of difference that you have amongst each other. So type theory, there could be two people, what is extrovert and introvert, But when we talk about trait theories, there are introversion and extroversion as a continuous dimension. So continuous dimension is every introversion will have a specific feature which will make him or her different from the other. So continuum is a straight line where you keep variating from one another. Whereas, when we talk about personality type, they're proper classification into two clusters and categories. So with this, let's move ahead, which is the first different kind of a theory that we had, which was Freud's theory. This is away from the trait and type. These are different theories which have their own origin, and trait and type will be followed later. So, and this is one of the most renowned psychologists who are associated to psychoanalysis that we will study. Sigmund Freud stated that personality, he gave a lot of contribution in terms of the field of psychology, and stated that your behavior, your personality is due to the unconscious mental processes that are going on. So we will understand all of these things, what is unconscious and how did he state that unconscious mental process can actually lead to your personality. And where is the unconscious? So first, personality is a manifestation of what? Unconscious mental material. What will this unconscious mental material comprise of? This will comprise of your desires, your needs, your motivation that you are not completely aware of. So these are going to be those feelings and motivations that you are not aware of. Also, these human behaviors, this aspect of the unconscious will also comprise of two major desires, sexual and aggressive. So Sigmund Freud focused on only two kinds of desires in a human, which was sexual in origin and aggressive in origin. Now, three major contributions that we will learn, and you see also see the topographic model of Sigmund Freud. This is the topographic model that will help us distinguish how the mind is organized. So, how is your mind differentiated into three parts that we will learn? Then there is a structure model of your entire personality, like the behavior within your personality is working how, and then there is a psychosexual stages of development. So let's move to the topographic model of the mind, which is the psyche. According to Sigmund Freud, in the psychopathology of everyday life, 1901, he's distinguished between the mind into three parts: the conscious mind, the pre or the subconscious, or the unconscious. So when we talk about the conscious mind is that part of your mind which is the current awareness. So this is like right now, the session that I'm giving you right now is something which is conscious mind. So this is going to be the relevant factors that are right now. So for example, I taught you the trait type and interactionism, that is your conscious mind, and it is readily available in your current awareness. So it's very easy to be aware of it. It's very easy to go back to this information. Now let's come to something which is the preconscious and the subconscious. This is something which we are not currently aware of, but you can easily pull it out and become aware of it. You can pull it out and get to your attention. It could be something that you've learned in class 11th and 12th. You just open the book and have a good read about it, and you're able to explain it to another sibling, a younger sibling of yours, or probably remember the entire thing. So it's like a quick revision, and you're able to recall it back to your attention. Then we move to the last, which is the unconscious, which was like of a greater deal to Sigmund Freud. He stated that yet your personality is a manifestation of the unconscious mental materials that you have in there. So, what is unconscious? Unconscious is that part of your mind that stores those feelings which are socially not acceptable. So, it could be a wish, it could be a desire, it could be a guilty feeling, an attempt that you did and it was not correct. These are those feelings and desires which are socially unacceptable. I can give you a lot of examples like this. Let's take an example. You lied to your friend about something, and that friend is still with you. So that is going to be that's going to be your unconscious material. You probably had a verbal fight with somebody, and you just said very too many curse words to that individual, and you're feeling guilty about that. That goes with the passage of time and moves back to the unconscious material. At one point of time, these informations are going to be completely unaware of. So at the moment, you might attempt something which is unacceptable, but with the passage of time, this information moves down to unconscious. So let's differentiate. How does this happen? So, when we talk about the conscious, remember the conscious is going to be something which is currently available. What is the sub and the preconscious? This is something that you can go back to any time and you can remember it. Unconscious is something might have happened like years back. You repressed it because it was you pushed it away because it was socially unacceptable. It was a guilty feeling. It was an emotion, desire which is not completely acceptable by you, and it moves to the unconscious and it's not aware of. So this is what was the topographic model of your mind, which is a psyche picture of your mind. So when we go back to the previous slide, you saw the iceberg, the berg which is exactly under the water, that's unconscious because it's not visible to us. So if you see an iceberg, only the tip is available. So the tip goes down to be the the conscious level. The one which is around the water is the pre-conscious and subconscious level because it keeps going up and down. You can become aware of it, and the unconscious is something which you're not completely aware of. Now let's move to the structural model of personality. And you see a beautiful picture over there. You know, your behaviors of your personality are actually moving in such a conflict in every day. A lot of us will have the three parts that we are going to talk about: the id, the ego, and the superego. So the id, like the picture suggests, I want to eat it this second, so it does not wait for everybody, anything, no supervision, no rules. What is the superego? The superego says, no, I cannot eat it because it's the middle of meeting. It's incorrect. It is unethical in the middle of me eating, just munching something in between your business meetings. That's so wrong. What does the ego say? Is that I need to justify the need. There is a need, but I need to incorporate it. So let's, as I just explained you the picture, let's move to integrate details of it, ego, and superego. This is the structure of your personality. So when I say it's the structure of this personality, remember your behaviors, your everyday behavior. Even like, let's take an example. Right now, if you're taking my classes and you're ardently, listening to all of these sessions, this is going to be something which is probably a superego because this is the moralistic principle of your behaviors. This is something that internalize all the morals from the society through socialization, the values of society, and help you be the correct, attempt the righteous behaviors in the society. Coming down to it, what is it? Let's take an example. You're feeling very sleepy, you don't want to watch the sessions at the moment. You feel, I'll do it later. What is that? That is your it functioning, which is your basic need of aggression or sexual drive is hampering you, which is the basic need is also sleep. So you want to sleep right now and not listen to our lessons. So it is the most primitive drive of human personality since birth. Obviously, basic needs are the first needs of our life, and it has to be completed there and then, which is very true. But also being id, we need to know id is the pleasure principle. It will always provide you pleasure, no matter it would be it be an aggressive drive, it be a sexual drive, it be a basic drive. It will always want to give you pleasure. That's why it is so impulsive. The fact that it completes its thing and gives you pleasure right now, right here, it is very pleasureful. It is the pleasure principle. And why does it do it? It does it to avoid the pain and receive the pleasure. Because of it, you want to gratify it right now. You are not under the sense of any rules. You do not want to be commanded by rules and the values of society. So it is impulsive, it is not moralistic, it is right here, right now. It wants to finish and complete your pleasure immediately and provide you pleasure and not pain. And that is avoid pain. Now let's come to, as we understood what was superego. Superego is the moralistic principle, and it will make sure that you internalize all the values of society and learn them through the process of socialization. And it's like the most appropriate behavior in any social conduct and a social environment. What is ego in between? Ego is actually something which is balancing the two. It is the reality principle. It makes sure that your id is in check. So it is the reality check, and it delays the gratification to get that gratification accepted, but in a very socially correct manner. So it's not that if the id is present, your ego is present, your id will not be satisfied. Ego does satisfy it, but by delaying it a little, and also with the passage of time making you more realistic and appropriate as per the situation. So I'll give you two simple examples for it. First, very picturesque example. If you've seen horses running with blinders over here, you know why there are blinders? The blinders are superego. The superego wants the horse to be running straight. That's why blinders are there, so that there is no vision around and it does not get deflected. Now, what is the horse? The horse is the id. It passionately runs. It just runs to provide pleasure. What is the man who's sitting over the horse? The one who holds the rein and pushes and pulls the horse. That's something which is the ego. Ego is trying to balance the aggression of the horse and the fact that the blinders are there and still provide the movement to the horse. So that's the navigation to us. So that becomes the reality check. I'll give you another example for id ego, super ego. After that, you can identify in your everyday behavior which is something which is more, more impactful, or occupies more space in your behavior. Is it the id? Is it the super ego or the ego? Let's take an example of an individual doing an examination. So you're sitting for an examination and suddenly you realize, oh, I do not know this paper, the last few questions. And it's just not one. There are two or four that you do not know. What will the it tell you? It will tell you, let's cheat and just pass it away. So it will make sure that you cheat at that moment of time, you get great marks, and you've cheated all the four questions at the end, providing you pleasure, no censor of any moral values, no correct and incorrect is being said. What does the super ego say? Super ego says, no, my teachers and my parents have said cheating is incorrect, I should not be doing it. I'm not looking at other people's paper. I'll try and finish the paper at my own merit and capabilities. That's your super ego. Complete moral principle. Does not think of anything but the right code of conduct. Now, what is the ego here? Now, ego feels that this is a big thing. Four questions, the paper comprised of 10, and you just attempting the six of them. What about the last four questions? And they are of great marking. It waits for a passage of time. It tries, it makes sure that you do all the paper. And with the support of teacher who comes to ask you if the paper is fine, you ask for a little support, asking of the fact that is the paper and the questions that I'm hinting on, is it correct? Is my guesswork a little correct? And the teacher says, yes, you're moving in the right direction, provides you support. So your delay of waiting for the teacher for support and some question answers that you can ask in between, that allows you to now actually fulfill your gratification, you gratify your needs, which is you are not able to cheat anymore, but get some hints here and there, and you just peeped away in someone's paper a little, and you just found one typical word which supported you in most of the answers. So what was this? This is the reality principles that we talk about. So this is how your behavior. Now you can look into all your behaviors of the day and think of what is more impressionable in your behavior. Is it id? Is it ego? Is it super ego? We need to know too much of it will provide antisocial behavior, criminal problems, unethical behaviors in life, and probably give you just pleasure and makes you very eccentric. Too much of super ego is also very suffocating, and always ego will also make you very potent. I'll tell you how. Did we realize ego has this factor of being in the balance? So check out the picture that is there. See, the external reality is the conscious. Did you realize the ego is in the conscious also? It's in the pre-conscious also. Obviously, it will be in the pre-conscious because you use your past experiences to deal with your current situation. And why it is in the unconscious? Unconscious, why? Because there has been so many experiences of times that might be there in repressed in your unconscious. Now let's talk about the id. Did you see? It is completely in the unconscious. So it's all pleasure. Being a completely id dominating person is going to be so harmful. So we need to have some id in super ego. And did we find super ego? Super ego is maximally in the preconscious. Why? Because all your learnings are coming from your ancestors and your elders, and that's your preconscious. Those are all learning. And it's on the current mode also. Current because the kind of motivational lectures, the good things, the value living things that you keep learning, that's the conscious level, which is the here and now. And it's even in the unconscious. Even in the unconscious, why? Because so much of learning that you've done from your parents, with your friends, with the times that you were younger, it is all moved to the unconscious levels also. So this is how id ego, super ego is present in your structures of mind also, which is conscious, unconscious, and preconscious. Now let's move to the fact when we were speaking of. Let's take an example. If the ego is very burdened, when there is too much of stress and anxiety from a desire of motive which is making you too overwhelming, which is you want to do something, but that is giving you a lot of pleasure, but at the same time giving you a lot of guilt feelings. Like let's take an example, when we're growing up, we end up falling for people who are at a very elderly status, like in movies that we see people falling for their elderly individuals with too many age gaps. So that's like a forbidden desire which is not correct in the society. We say there needs to be an appropriate level of difference of age in between people, or falling for people who are younger than you, way younger than you. So these are something which are pleasures that you want. Now, ego is very important. Ego's responsibility is make sure that you actually attain all of the eight, but with some reality check. So, according to Freud, the sole aim of ego defense mechanism is to protect you from the anxiety. Who's giving you anxiety? The it is giving you anxiety. So now does how does the ego manages you? How do they make sure that you receive all the pleasures, but with a reality check? Let's look at the picture and learn all of them. There are beautiful examples to all of them. Now let's take care of denial. Denial is complete refusal of the real event that has happened. You completely deny it because it's unpleasant. So there is an example that Kyla refuses to admit that she has an alcohol problem, and she's unable to go single day without excessively taking alcohol. So it's a complete denial of an activity which is very incorrect. So that's denial. Another thing, people who are suffering from any sort of syndrome, which is AIDS and human immunodeficiency virus, they completely deny of having such problems in their life. Even if they're going through such a physical fatalistic disease, they say we do not have this. Why? Because also the stigma which is attached in the society. Now, moving to displacement. Displacement is a transferring inappropriate urge or behavior onto a more acceptable and threatening target. Which is displacement is if your anger is on person A, you transfer it from person A to person B. So this is like you've displaced the anger from A to B. So your source goes to another target now. Your anger is actually sourced to person A, but you're actually targeting to person B. It happens with a lot of people. You're angry on your older brother, and you go and express it over verbally. You verbally get abusive to to your mothers, to your pets. So let's take an example here. During a lunch at the restaurant, Mark is very angry with his older brother, but he actually expresses the anger not on the brother, but on the person who's serving the food. We usually do that. We're very angry with our partners, but we end up throwing a lot of tiff on our friends, on our parents, and on people who we feel are not very important in our life. So next is projection. So see, this is all the ways of egos to help you reduce the anxiety which is coming from the it, which is the unacceptable feelings and pleasures that the it gives you. Projection is attributing your unacceptable feeling and projecting into onto other people. Like, Chris often cheats on her boyfriend, but suspects that her boyfriend's cheating, which is very common. People expect that the people are cheating themselves, and they put it on and question their counterpart. Like, where are you going? Why are you always out? Why can't I trust you? So the problem is not with the person who's going out, the problem is the person himself. It's projecting his own unacceptable feelings onto them. Then there is rationalization. You can understand rationalization by just justifying your inappropriate, less acceptable behaviors. Like if you're cheating, you give an excuse. Rationalization can be simply understood as excuse. You can just say, like you failed in an examination, and what do you tell to your parents? The paper was very difficult. Everyone has failed. My professor makes very difficult papers. So that's rationalization. Then we move to reaction formation. Reaction formation is like reducing anxiety by adopting a complete opposite feeling of what you're actually feeling. So if you're feeling a lot of hatred towards somebody, you show a lot of adoration and a lot of respect for that person. So it's a complete opposite belief that you end up developing. So there's an example. Nadia is angry with her co-worker Beth for always arriving late to work for after a night of partying. So, but she's very nice and agreeing that it's very cool that we party, and it does happen that we often get late. So what are you doing? Your anger is getting reaction formed in a very cool pattern. So that's like a opposite thing. What is regression? The next one, regression is returning to a younger coping mechanism of your developmental stages to deal with the anxiety. So this is all that all children do it today. You want to go out with your friends and your parents tell you a no, you stop eating, you bang the doors, you lock yourself in rooms. This is a way of coping of a child. As an adult, you need to be conversing with your parents, convincing them. So that's how it happens in regression. Then another way is repression. Repression was one of the most oldest defense mechanism, and not very healthy also. It's like suppressing your painful memories. So it's like, see, Lashia cannot remember her grandmother's fatal heart attack through, although she was present over there. So she's completely forgotten that feeling of missing her grandparents or someone that she or he loves a lot. So that's like repressing, motivatedly forgetting the event which is causing you a lot of distress, a lot of anxiety. Then there is sublimation, which is redirecting all your unacceptable feelings and desires to a socially acceptable behavior. Like Jerome's desire for revenge on drunk divers who killed his son is now channelized in a community service or a community group to help people who've lost people through such driving cases. So, and also, at times it could also be a person whose a family mate has cancer and lost the person for cancer actually does cancer drives for understanding that why does this disease happen to people and supports such family people. So these are ego defense mechanisms. I state again, ego is very burdened because it has to manage the anxiety of the id and rationalize you all the time. So it uses some ego defense mechanisms and to reduce the anxiety of the id and to make you survive through those pleasures in a very acceptable pattern. But remember, too much of uses of ego defense mechanism is very harmful. It could lead to a wrong living and functionality in society. Now, the third part of Sigmund Freud was psychosexual stages of development. One of the most famous stages of development of Sigmund Freud. These are five stages. This would you might find this to be very inappropriate because when we talk about sexual desires and when we talk about unconscious, Sigmund Freud himself is not accepted. And just to increase your knowledge and general knowledge, Sigmund Freud has been he was nominated for Nobel Prize for 13 times, but he did not receive the Nobel Prize. Reasons were all of this that his methods were very unscientific, they were very sexual and unconsciously dwelling. How can a development be just sexual and just reside in your unconscious? So that's why he always, was not accepted in that part at that part of our living at 1920s and 1890s also. So these are five stages of personality development. So what does these stages suggest? I'll first give you a little introduction before I show you the PPT. See, psychosexual stages suggest that our body is developing sexually through five stages. Every stage has a zone which is called the erogenous zones. So every stage has a zone which is satisfied. So it is a kind of a sexual bodily satisfaction that you give to that zone. And if that zone is very adequately satisfied, you move to the next. Remember, if you do not satisfy that erogenous zone, you would be arrested in your development stage. And that arrest will give you some fixation. So arresting at any stage of development, which is falling back, is called fixation. These fixation usually come out as disorders in the later stages of life of your adulthood. Now let's start with the first and the second stage of life. The first stage is the oral stage that we have. Oral stage starts, you'll find the terms also very biologically associated because his stages were also of psychosexual development. So mouth is the stage of pleasure zone that has to be satisfied. So children who are completely dependent on their parents at this point of time, remember, mouth is it is the part of body which is feeded and the child relaxes, develops the pleasure by being fed, by being breastfed by the mother. So you need to remember sucking, swallowing are something which actually gives him pleasure. Now, if you over gratify or under gratify the mouth, which is if you overdo, overfeeding to the child or underfeeding to the child, this will result in overeating problems, drinking behaviors, because fixation is happening here. You're over satisfying the mouth, which is the zone, or you're under satisfying the mouth. So this is leading to fixation, which can be seen in the form of drinking, smoking, which is also called as oral incooperative and oral ingestive people in future. So this could be smoking, anything which is associated to mouth. Chewing gums, drinking, smoking, nail biting is another aspect of this, which is oral sadistic, where people, nail bite, talk too much, chewing gums all the time. So any overaction of the mouth is something which is associated to your oral stage fixation. Also, addiction is one of them. Now, moving to next stage. Let's take an example. Someone has been fed it very well, has been weaned off on time from the parent, and moves to the second stage. Second stage is called the anal stage. This is called the anal stage because here the focus stands out to be something which is the genitals of the body. So the genitals of the body suggest that you need to be giving toilet trainings to the child at this point of time. Why toilet trainings? Because we all need to know 2 years is one point of time that children are, they are, what do you call this? They get something which is, get toilet training because by 2 years of life, they're moving ahead and they're moving ahead from their home to their school life. school life requires a lot of training of toiletry. Remember, if you've not toilet trained a child before school, it's going to be so difficult for them to manage their body. So remember, the entire focus is the genital. Why? We need to toilet train them, and the pleasure is coming from the expulsion and retention of the genital at this point of time. So expulsion of urine and feces and retention of the same. So children actually experience pleasure in this stage and believe if the toilet training is too harsh and too lenient, it can cause some sort of fixation in the life. So if the stage has too harsh of a toilet training, remember the child is being told, you will not go to the washroom until I come back to your school. So you're not going to use washrooms of the school. You will only wait for me. So there are some parents who tell their children, I'm going to leave you at 9 at school, as preschoolers, and I'm going to come at 12:30 and pick you up. Remember, you're telling them not to use washroom for 4 hours. So this is like a too much of pressure. So this is harsher control. This will lead to messy personality, too much of mess, too much of disorganized, at times too much of what do you call this? Too much of control over themselves. They want to do it. Sorry, it is not messiness, but too much of control, too much of organization, stiffness in themselves. So these people can suffer from organization problems like OCD. They can suffer from anxiety issues also. Later life, if there's a child who's been too lenient, has been never been told about toilet training, and the child does not know how do I need to manage my body when I go to school, these children are somewhere who are lesser and confident. They are very messy. They're not organized. They're not orderly around their environment. So they are called anal retentive, and the others are called anal repulsive. So anal repulsive are allowed. Do anything that you want. Retentive, harsh. Do not do this. Too orderly. So it's too much of stringentness gives you what? It can give you features of OCD, too much of organizations. So this finishes with the second stage. Let's take an example. You've successfully moved from this stage to the other. These are like, you can check the picture. Anal is all about the toilet training. The first is the feeding one. The third one that we come down to is, you will find a child and the mother. You see the girl clinging to the father. The fourth one is like the latent phase. It's a very relaxing stage. And the fifth one is the genital stage that we'll come down to. So let's come to the third stage. Looks very inappropriate in some cultures. Again, the genital is the erogenous zone here also, but in another way, in a very different way. There, the toilet training, which is the expulsion and retention, was something that was the source of pleasure. Here, the genital is phallic stage comes from the Greek word called phallos, which means penis. And children, knowingly, unknowingly, you all know, they start touching their genital at that moment of 3 and 4. And you remember, parents keep telling children, don't touch yourself, don't touch yourself. So it's like always a self check that the parents end up giving to children. So during this stage, you will understand, as Sigmund Freud found, that children get to know that there is physiologically in psychology a difference between how does a female genital and male genital be. So Sigmund Freud proposed that a male child experiences an Oedipus complex and a female child experiences an Electra complex. How? The Oedipus complex is a real story, that there was a prince called Oedipus who fell in love with his mother, like more than the biological, affectionate love, sexually fell in love with the mother and started having rivalry feelings towards the father. He got along with his sister and killed his father to get married to the mother. And it really happened. Oedipus is a real story. And on the basis of that, he gave something which was the Oedipus complex, which is, I don't know how much we can understand and accept it in the Indian scenario. But Sigmund Freud stated that every child experiences this Oedipus complex in some parameters, some intensity. And on the counterpart, it's the Electra, where it involves sexual feeling towards the girl child, involves sexual feeling towards the father, and hatred towards the mother. And as soon, remember, the hatred actually dissolves, the resolution of this stage has happened. So Oedipus and Electra complex does resolve. It does. So let's take an example. A child has an hatred feeling towards a male child has it towards the father. Now, with the passage of time, let's take an example. The Oedipus complex starts dissolving. It starts getting resolved. The male child will start role modeling the father, which is he would start acting like the father, wearing clothes like the father. He'd come with his blazer or shirt and show it to the mother. So this is role modeling the father. And now, when role modeling starts, resolution of this stage happens. Yes, this stage looks very inappropriate, but always remember, you can always check out. There have been times when you were young and you hated if your father held any other child. or your mother's, cares or just took care of some other, child more, the children do get angry. That jealousy, that hitting, of your parent, why did you take care of somebody else and why are you holding another child? That is something which is a feature of Oedipus and Electra complex. Resolution happens when you start role modeling the same sex parent. Now, coming to the fourth stage, very simple. You'll find a sudden change. This stage finishes at the age of 6. 7 is the time when you come to class fourth and fifth. Mathematics and science comes into play. Education is something that all your sexual energy is channelized. You completely forget about your sexual feelings. There's a complete zero. You don't remember anything about your sexual feelings now, and with no little and no interest in opposite gender. 6 and 7 years, and at times 11 years is time, and 10 years that you will have more same sex uh, friends. You would not even interested in having an opposite gender friend at this point of time. With this, we move to the last stage, which is called the genital stage. It's called the genital because now you're focused towards heterosexual relationships. Successful completion, this actually, if you come to this stage successfully, you are capable of making mature sexual intimate relationships because it's 12 years and above, 12, 13, which is teenagers. You feel that urged and having crushes and falling in love with the boys and boys falling in love with girls. This is the final stage according to him. And here he states psychosexual development gets completed when the child actually starts developing proper heterosexual relationship, starts getting and falling and making intimate relationship with the others. So did you realize these sexual stages of development are very different from what we see around? Why? Sexual zones are there. We are developing sexually, and the entire body has energies which is sexual in nature. So this is what is different from Sigmund Freud in five sex psychosexual stages, where he does not consider. Let's take the drawback. He did not consider social categories. Parental learning is nowhere. There isn't environmental factors, nothing. So these are some drawbacks that he had. And on top of that, the theory is also not very scientific. It's not been researched over millions of people or thousands of people. There are only two people that the theory was made upon, a boy and the girl. And it's very womanly inferior. So that was another thing. So this finishes with psychosexual stages of development of Sigmund Freud. In a quick, snap, you can glimpse, you can just see the picture. 0 to 2, oral, then anal, then phallic, latency, and genital. This completes with something which suggests to be yes, the psychosexual stages of development of Sigmund Freud. Now, after finishing Sigmund Freud, we move to who came after Sigmund Freud. Was there only sexual drives that went on in psychology, or there was someone else? Yes, there were followers, which was called Neo-Freudians, and these were equally the defectors, which is there was a psychoanalytical forum, Sigmund Freud, which was taking care of all the development of Sigmund Freud's theories, where there were many psychologists, but one after the other, all these psychologists left him. Why? Because of his too much of ideology, idealizing with sexual drives, women being inferior, only bodily desires. So because of that, there were more people who came into play, who were initially with Sigmund Freud, but then moved away. The first Neo-Freudian, the first kind of Freudian, Neo-Freudian who gave a personality development was Alfred Adler. A very beautiful theory and a very simple one. Look at it. It says individual psychology. So who's important? The individual is important. How Alfred Adler suggested that everyone strives for power, glory, superiority. Yes, we all want to be superior. We all want to be attain a lot of power in our life and want to be glorious in our life. Whatever that we do, that we be remarkably appreciated for that. So this, because of this, people develop their own lifestyle, their own principles, their own power principles that they have, which makes their life meaningful. And this theory was suggested as individual psychology. He also proposed that there is a need to understand one personality in social context. So let's forget the sexual drive. He stated that you need to understand an individual's personality, not just sexually, but also socially. Then, according to him, he also suggested that instead of the innate force that he suggested as instincts, the sexual drive, which was by Sigmund Freud, we need to focus our patterns on behaviors. What behavior motivates you to do something? What behavior motivates you socially to give you a socially appropriate behavior? So, two things that he disliked about Sigmund Freud was you need to consider the personality development under social context. You needn't pay attention to instincts, which is sexual and biological drives. You need to pay attention to our innate, which is inborn tendency to be motivated to keep performing. So we all know that, and we do all agree that the 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 need to grow is an everyday thing. We all want to grow every day. It's an innate desire in us to reach to our fullest potential. Now, another concept that he gave was superiority complex and inferiority complex. He stated that everyone has this feeling of inferiority, which is very natural and innate, but we overcome these feelings with the passage of time, which is overcoming the feelings of inferiority is essential for a proper and optimal development. And if you're able to overcome these feelings, you are leading a superior, healthy development according to Alfred Adler. Also, there were a few more things that he introduced, which was sibling rivalry and birth order positioning. You know, how is the personality of the first child, second born, and the third born of the family? And sibling rivalry, to explain you the fact, we always see that sibling competition, where the parents' love always goes to the new child and the affection for the first child actually reduces. So this was something which was also discussed, and which, that love for the new child gave rise to sibling rivalry and how it strains relationship between the parents and the siblings. This was also given by Alfred Adler. So very correctly says it's individual psychology. We develop meaningfully and wholly by feeling superior. We all have that feeling of inferiority, but we overcome that inferiority, right? And once you overcome that inferiority, that gives you a sense of meaningfulness in your life, which is your life principles and your motivational goals of your life, your personal goals. And these personal goals are very important to everybody. Now, let's move to another neo-Freudian, which is Carl Jung. Carl Jung was one of the most closest individuals to Sigmund Freud, but the first to move out from Sigmund Freud because of a lot of reasons. First of all, he dejected that there isn't anything called unconscious. There is something called a personal unconscious that comprises of a lot of things. Your personal experiences that you have gone through from a long period of time, which also have some repressed feelings. Also, these will be a collection of all your life incidences that you have. He also proposed that everyone has an ability to have a balance between their conscious and unconscious forces. So this was something very new. According to Sigmund Freud, conscious, unconscious, preconscious are a very different level. They all are falling at a different level. But according to Carl Jung suggested that we have something which is called a collective unconscious, which has all the feelings, no matter it's repressed, no matter what kind of feelings, but all the collection of your feelings goes there, which is your personal unconscious. Then, another thing that he suggested, that there is an ability of an individual to differentiate between the conscious and the unconscious. So we have that ability. Also, he extended the concept of unconscious a little more and stated that Freud obviously considered that the unconscious is one unconscious is that part of personality which is a storehouse for repressed feelings, motivation, sexual desires. But Jung deviated and moved away from this thought instead that unconscious is a collection of all the humanly like things, which is all the feelings that you share, all the experiences that you share. And it also has some kind of evolutionary processes in it, which are common in nature. So your unconscious will also not only just comprise of something which is collection of your experiences that we spoke about, but also some common processes which is evolutionary in nature. Like these common processes were called as archetypes. These archetypes are primordial images which is common to all. Like motherland is common to all, like and motherhood is common to all. God as a factor, everyone will picturize one thing with God. Maybe probably a picture, something that wish fulfills you, guides you, mentors you. What will mother comes out to be? Mother comes out to be unconditional love to everybody. Isn't it common and it's universal? So according to them, extended the idea of the unconscious. It said it's a collective unconscious which is common to all and universal in nature. And it has evolutionary processes. Evolutionary, it's going to be common to everybody in the mankind, that you, at least in one culture that we have. Then he also stated, which I stated in italics, I would love to read it for you. He at the end stated that the self knowing about the wholeness of one's own identity was one kind of self. Then the persona, not genuine. So you have another thing in the unconscious which is called the persona, which is not genuine self, but the self that you show to people. Then there is an anima. Anima is the feminine self of the men, And then there is animus, which is the masculine side of a female. And then there is a shadow, which is the negative part of your personality that you never show to anybody. So remember, your unconscious comprises of so many things. I'll show you with a picture. See, this is your self, right? Your ego is there, your persona is there, your shadow is there, your anima and animus is there. This entire is a collection of unconscious that you have. So something which is very different from unconscious that you had. So your unconscious, according to here, is a personal unconscious, which has all your experiences and feelings, repressed feelings, feelings of your ability, inability, and also evolutionary processes, which was, as I said, are called archetype primordial images. So your self will comprise of a shadow, which is a negative self. It will comprise of the self that you know about yourself, and a persona, which is not genuine, but you show to people, a facade that you show to the environment, which is very true. And obviously, an animus and an anima of everybody within themselves. A very beautiful, thought about the unconscious, which was extended by Carl Jung, and that was the reason it was called analytical psychology, because it talks about oneness and wholeness and balance of unconscious and conscious personality. Now let's move to something which is behavioral approach. Behavioral approach was a very simple approach. We've already done this. Behavioral approach suggested us. It is two major people, Sigmund Freud, two major psychologists and founders, which was J.B. Watson and B.F. Skinner. And we've already done this, that what did behaviorists talked about in the foundation of psychology in our first few lectures, that behaviorism stated that personality development has been dependent upon the behaviors. Why? Behavior is something which is concrete and abstract. Behavior is something which is verifiable. Behavior is something that you can see, verify, and scientifically test. And according to behaviorists, personality was a very abstract and a hypothetical concept. Why? Your behaviors keep changing, your personality can equally change. And it can be best understood in the margin of SR relationship, which is stimulus and response, which was very true. Every personality development, according to behaviorism, can be understood on the basis of S and R connection. So, whatever stimulus comes in is your response. So, this is how behaviorists stated their understanding of personality on the basis of the fact that your behaviors can change and so can your personality, which is very true. You change your behavior with the help of what? Classical conditioning, observational learning, and instrumental conditioning. So the kind of reinforcement that you keep getting from environment, elders, and socialization keeps changing your behavior, and it keeps changing and shaping your personality. Also, a very famous, comment that B.F. Skinner stated. He stated that you give me any child, and I'm going to make him a doctor, engineer in the kind of environment that I would like, which the individual will flourish in. So, according to them, what we are learning as a result of learning can also be unlearned as a result of learning. So, see, learning and unlearning is equally possible according to the behaviorist approach of personality. A very simple approach, you've already done this with me before in the sessions. Now, a very positive and a third approach and a third force approach, this was called, and we've done this before in multiply, which was called the humanistic approach. Why humanistic? Humanistic approach focused on humans. They found us very positive and capable. They thought that we are responsible for our growth and development, and they said that our existence is because of being very positive. Humans are positive, humans are capable of growth and development, and we are always moving towards our existence, giving meaning to our existence. And they had complete, negation towards the pessimistic approach of Sigmund Freud. He stated that psychoanalysis is very pessimistic towards human behavior. Two major psychologists, Carl Jung and Abraham Maslow. Carl Jung gave a concept of ideal and real self, which is like the real self is something which you perceive yourself to be. Ideal is something that you want to be. So if the ideal and the real self has higher congruence, you are a healthy individual. It's lesser overlapping, you are an incongruent individual, an unhealthy individual. Also, at the same time, Maslow's very famous needs of hierarchy, which is this, which we've done multiple times, which is physiological need comes first, then the then the safety, social, esteem, and the last is something which is actualization. So, however, your behaviors and your goal achievement is always working according to this. You are satisfying your lower needs and then reaching to your upper needs. We say a lot of people do not reach to self actualization. A lot of us are still there in the esteem needs, and a lot of us have not reached to actualization, which is completely fine. So you first take care of your hunger, thirst, your basic needs, then the safety, which is financial security, well-being, then attaching to people. Once attachment and security, love and belonging happens, you move to achievement, confidence, recognition and attention and competence. And the last is achieving your fullest potential, which is self-actualization. A very positive approach of humanism that focuses on the fact that humans are always growing and has the innate capacity to grow and reach to their fullest potential. So this finishes with humanistic approach to personality. Now let's move to trait. Trait approaches I began. Trait were the dispositions which differentiates you with people to people. So let's understand how many people gave trait approaches. Many psychologists. Allport is ideally the pioneer of this. He gave approximately 23,000 of adjectives, and he felt that this is very difficult. I cannot give every individual a trait and name them. So he differentiated the traits into three types: cardinal, secondary, and central. Cardinal traits are those traits of your personality which is the master control of your personality. It's overly generalized principles of your personality, which is something a generalized disposition is equal to a characteristic which defines your entire personality. I'll give you examples, you'll understand. Hitler is ideally, I think, an example for dictatorship that we have. Also, a man of good words. He was a great orator. And at the same time, I feel Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa is an example of charity, good well-being, giving people. She was obviously epitome of epitome of giving to people. Did so much of social work. Also, Mahatma Gandhi, non-violence is something that you can directly associate. So, a master trait is this, which takes over the principles of your life, goal of your life. Then we come to central. Central are trait which is 510 in nature in you, and these are traits which you use to define yourself to people in a social gathering. This is something that you use your CVs and resume to identify yourself with. One of the most common, everyone possesses approximately 5 to 10 of them, and it shapes your personality also. The last is secondary, not very generalized, not very. It's not something which is very generalized. It's very less relevant. It could be choices of color, food items, and people at some point of time. So it's very situational and circumstantial, right? Then we move to something which is Cattell's approach. Cattell's approach was very simple. He gave two traits to us, stated there is a source trait and a surface trait. Source traits were more important because they gave rise to 16 personality factor questionnaire to us, and surface traits were umbrella terms, more relatively stable, and source traits were one which made up surfaces for us. So they were as simple as that. So surface, as the surface is too huge, so too many source will collect and make a surface trait. So surface is a bigger one, and sources are sources leading to formation of 16 personality factor questionnaire for Raymond Cattell. This was divided through statistical method. 16PF happened to be a very scientific methodological questionnaire. Why? It was done using 16 personality factor questionnaire, a very nice statistical tool which reduces the number of traits into lesser numbers. So 97 came down to 27, and 27 came down to 16. So it's a very scientific method that we have. Now let's move to Erickson's trait, a very common trait theory that you'll find around. He stated that we have two dimensions: neuroticism versus stability, and extroversion versus introversion. Very simple. Extroversion is people who are, who seek external, internal stimulation. So extroverts are socially dwelling, seek into a lot of adventure. They prefer going out, and it's like a stress buster to have company to them. Whereas introverts are shy, very observant, like their own company, they're moving inward, a little moving inward. And the next is neuroticism versus stability. Neuroticism is something that we talk about. Are people very moody, a little unstable, very, very anxious, and if too much of neuroticism features are there, which is moodiness, anxiety, instability, agitation about smaller things, restlessness. This will lead to a lot of maladaptive behaviors. On opposite of it is stability, emotional stability. Emotional stability is being in control, being able to control your moods, being able to understand the deflection of moods in mind is something which is emotionally stable. There was another last dimension, which was psychoticism. Not accepted by people. It was not devised and given to people because psychoticism was a very harsh word. Aggressive, antisocial, egocentric, and impulsive. And opposite would be socialization, empathic, altruistic, and conventional people. People very giving, very empathetic on opposite to aggressive and impulsive people and antisocial behavior, and very conventional, very right people. So this is like a picture that you can help down to. See, neurotic and emotionally stable. You find those pictures around over there. Extroversion would be people which are lively, do you see? Carefree, sociable, very talkative. Look at the introversion, calm, passive. They are a little unsociable. They're very careful. Look at the neurotic part. Anxiety, lot of restlessness, pessimism, too much of negatives to self, and rigid. And look at emotionally stable people, very, very responsible. Leadership, easygoing, outgoing, right? So this finishes with this Eisen's trait. Another major trait, very simple. This is one of the most theoretically well researched theory, McCrane-Costa's Big Five factor, which is ocean is an acronym used for this. We can learn it through this, which is openness. Openness are people very creative, very open to new things, and low would be people to openness. These are bipolar traits. So when we talk about bipolar traits over here, there would be, if you're open, the other is going to be less imaginative and not open to ideas. Conscientiousness is paying attention to details, setting up details, very focused to finishes of things, and the others is less structured, not very organized. Extroversion, as we did, the other would be introversion. The other is agreeableness, people who show a lot of interest in other people, helping other people, caring for the other people. The other would be rigid, very eccentric. And the last is N, which is neuroticism, which is people who are way too moody, ones who feel very anxious, as we talked about neuroticism. The other would be, when we talk about something, neuroticism, the high levels would be way too anxiety, too much of moodiness and restlessness. The other would be lesser low levels, would be they would be less emotionally stable in comparison to the more emotionally stable. So ocean is something that you can use this as an acronym. One of the most theoretically well devised theory that we talk about. They had their assessments also that we come down to, which is personality assessment. Personality assessment, according to APA, was one of the most specialized way of assessing your personality dispositions and traits. We administer our knowledge well and scientifically and systematically and make interpretation through assessments. There are two kinds of assessment that you see up and down. You can find a self-report measure. Self-report are measures which is like a paper pencil test. You're given 20 questions and you have to report about your own self. They're fairly structured, they're very direct, and they have options which are yes, no, maybe, and options given and you need to choose. And we judge them on the face value of it. On the other, a projective test based upon Sigmund Freud's ideology. Indirect tests these are, and like projective test, Rorschach is one of those. Like you have an ink block test, you judge an ink block, and on the basis of that picture and an ink block, we decide that what your personality is. Why do we call it an indirect test? Because the pictures here help you devise the indirect feelings and desires to come at the superficial level of the upper conscious. So when we talk about the direct tests, they take care of the conscious. When we talk about the indirect tests, they are pictures, images, in blocks that pulls out your feelings and desires that you don't want to say out, and we interpret it. But it's very subjective. Reliability, validity is something which is like questioned. And when we talk about the direct testing is very standardized. It's more reliable, more valid, and something that we address more in terms of school living in organizational level that we have. And projective tests are usually, as per Sigmund Freud said, was one of the best techniques that we had. This finishes with assessment of personality in a grosser level. We will be continuing with the same. Today we covered the theories of personality, the major approaches, and the different kinds of approaches and major theories of Sigmund Freud and Neo-Freudians that we had. Hope the session was complete and holistically understood by each one of you. And I continue with the next session with something which is intelligence. I hope you all go through my sessions again and again to know and understand it well. Hope personality assessment, and adjustment today has been great. Thank you and have a good day.